Oriental. I'm
Oh,
looking
thank
at the not so regulars in the meeting.
Hi, everyone.
All right, I think we can start, and we'll continue. Greetings, everyone. Really excited to have you all here today. We've got two amazing speakers, but I'll start with Prof. Honikman, who is a psychiatrist, and really excited to have her here as our guest speaker for today. We've been working on this for a few months and really excited that it's happening. And she's an expert in maternal mental health, somebody that I look up to in the field. And so we'll be really excited to hear your thoughts on views. And then we've got Dr. Amy Patterson, who is, so much to say about Amy, but she's part of the team, she's part of the family. So I won't go into a long introduction, except that Amy is really passionate about women's surgery, women's outcomes. And so we thought it would be excellent to have Amy also speak today because we've got Prof. Honikman. And the topic today is obstetric violence and possible remedies, including the secret history method. I'm also quite curious on learning more about this. But our chair today is Sipho Nderea, as you all know Sipho, and I'll hand over to Sipho to chair the session. Thank you, and looking forward to your talks.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Prof. Honikman. It's really great. We're really excited to be having today's academic meeting. So what I'll do is just start off by reading our two speakers' bios. So Prof. Honikman is Associate Professor Simone Honikman. She's the Director of the Perinatal Mental Health Project and Associate Professor at UCT. She has a medical degree and an MPhil in maternal and child health from the University of Cape Town. And she's worked as a medical officer in psychiatry, peds, obs and gynae, as well as HIV medicine. And so in 2002, she founded the Perinatal Mental Health Project, currently located within the Alan J. Fisher Center for Public Mental Health at the Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health at UCT. And she's collaborated in several global mental health research consortia and has published papers and book chapters on maternal mental health. She's actively involved in policing, advocacy work, and multimedia resource development for maternal health in low resource centers, and she conducts training and develops capacity building resources for a wide range of service providers and organizations. She's also actively involved with the Global Alliance for Maternal Health and the African Alliance for Maternal Health, and has contributed to several World Health Organization initiatives. And she's a lifelong Ashoka Fellow. And then our first speaker, I think most of us will know her, but for those of you who don't, Dr. Amy Patterson is finishing her MSc in global surgery and a graduate of UCT with an MBCHB. She graduated with first class honors and the class medal for best overall performance in medicine. She's dedicated to community health in terms of her work with the Shoko clinics throughout her student years, and she led the Friends of Doctors Without Borders for about 2 years. She returned to KZN to do her internship at Durban's Addington Hospital, and her current research looks at surgical outcomes for women in Africa. And she's currently she's an incoming Rhodes Scholar, and she's hoping to use that Rhodes Scholarship to expand the work and advocate for women and for women's and child's health. So I think we have an excellent program of speakers. So we're going to be starting with Dr. Paterson, who's going to be unpacking the Lancet Commission on Women and Health. And then Prof. Honikman is going to be further exploring obstetric violence and the topic at hand. So I think what we'll do is we'll just have Dr. Paterson start with her presentation. And then if you have any questions or comments, you can use the chat. And then Prof. Honikman will speak, and then thereafter we'll have our Q&A session. With all that said, please take it away, Dr. Paterson.
Thank you so much, Sipho. I'm doing this in an on-call room, so I'm going to turn my camera off because the signal isn't always the best. And then I'll just share my screen. Let me know if everyone can see. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Patterson, and I'm very honored to be giving the introductory article review for this meeting. As a means of introduction, this slide is currently what my world looks like. I'm working as a ComServe doctor in the maternity and child section of a district hospital in KZN, specifically in the neonatal unit. And while I spend a lot of time with babies and an equal amount of time with midwives and new moms, I spend an equal amount of time with midwives and new moms. And so I'm really excited and really interested that we have Dr. Honikman here, Prof. Honikman here, and I'm really interested in her research and presentation today from a practical point of view. So I'm going to try not take too much time up. My presentation today is a little bit more theoretical than my everyday work and is based on my research interest, which is women and health and the way that they interact. Prof. Honikman and I thought it might be interesting to start with a review of the Lancet Commission's report on women and health, which was released in 2015 and is quite a powerful advocacy document. And this will hopefully serve as an overview, and I think Prof. Honikman's research really brings this report's findings to life. So what is the Lancet Commission on Women and Health? Women and Health, which is a concept that I will unpack in a few seconds, is a construct that was initially conceived in Mexico in 2000, and then the Harvard School of Public Health based a health initiative on it, which then partnered with the Lancet and the school at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing to form the Women and Health Commission in November of 2012. And essentially, the commission brought together leading thinkers, program leaders, and activists from around the world, from lots of different disciplines and sectors, to comprehensively analyze the complex relations between women and health in what is a rapidly changing environment. And one of the main things that the 14 commissioners did was bring together 23 very diverse people to write this report. It's 46 pages, so I'm going to give a very brief overview and might go fairly fast. But I would highly recommend giving the report a read if it's something that you're interested in. So why women and health? I think the caption on the front page of the report summarizes it really well when it says women and health, not women's health. The distinction is important. It is important because unless the contribution women make to society is recognized, the new post-2015 global goal of sustainability will be little more than a distant utopia. So essentially, it's happened to our screen. There you go. So women and health is essentially a novel concept that refers to the multifaceted pathways through which women and health interact. So it's moving beyond the traditional exclusive focus on women's health to address the roles of women as both users and providers of healthcare and highlighting the potential for synergy between them. So this is the conceptual framework of the article. I think in reality, the Venn diagram overlaps even more than shown here, but it is meant to show the interplay between women as both targets of healthcare interventions and crucial components of the social response to health needs. And then it's clear that what women's roles look like as providers or as patients in the healthcare system is heavily affected by all of those external forces which are represented as arrows in this diagram. And then expanding from this diagram, the Commission makes 5 key points, and those are what I'm going to briefly highlight today. So key point 1 is that girls and women's health is in transition, and this results in changing needs and demands. For example, there is simultaneously the largest cohort of adolescents and youth in history, as well as overall gains in life expectancy, which means at least 1/3 of a woman's life may be spent in her post-reproductive years. And as many women are currently dying from cervical cancer as from pregnancy-related conditions. And while there's been a lot of focus on women's health and empowerment in recent years, we still live in an era in which poverty and gender inequity continue to affect the health of millions of women. However, what the report makes clear is that women's health is not only a goal in itself, but a key strategy for sustainable societal advancement. And so as these transitions happen, for example, as urbanization and shifts in family structure require women to take on responsibility as breadwinners while still maintaining traditional household and caregiving responsibilities, it also makes women even more central to sustainable societal advancement or development. And this is currently particularly true in low and middle income countries. And so the argument the Commission is essentially making is that this is not just a plea to improve women's health because it will benefit women, but because it will benefit the world. Key point 2 is that women are more than their reproductive role, which is originally what we thought of when we said women's health. And the adoption of a life course approach that cares for women at every age is urgently required. And this needs to address the unfinished agendas of reproductive health, of nutrition, infectious diseases, and the growing burden of non-communicable diseases. Key point 3 is that the most vulnerable women receive care from the most disenfranchised members of the healthcare system, being community health workers, traditional birth attendants, or untrained relatives who are likely to be women. These caregivers are frequently under-resourced, underpaid or unpaid, undertrained, and often not formally recognized by the health system at all, which is one of the most problematic ways by which inequities are perpetuated. And this is a cycle that needs to be broken. The authors of the report state that they feel female healthcare providers are not working to their full potential because they are undervalued and undersupported by the systems in which they work. And that although they are the backbone of the healthcare system, their report has found women are less represented in executive or management level positions in health. So they argue that value, training, compensation, and support of these caregivers would prepare them to offer adequate healthcare and in turn would eventually reduce maternal and perinatal morbidity and mortality. Key point 4, you'll find most of my stock images have been replaced with women who are actually currently involved in UCT global surgery and making waves. So I thought they would be appropriate stock photos instead. It is with everyone's consent. So key point 4 is that, yes, women are considered a vulnerable population group, but they are also central to caregiving, community flourishing, and macroeconomic development. The Commission argues that women are a hidden subsidy to health systems and societies. They did an analysis, this is their own analysis, of 32 countries, which account for 52% of the world's population, and estimated that the financial value of women's contributions in the health system alone in 2010 was $3 trillion, which comes to 46 trillion, I think is how you say that, rand. And half of this estimated contribution is actually currently unpaid. The final key point is one which I think we are all unfortunately aware of. Few gender-sensitive policies exist that enable women to integrate their social, biological, and occupational roles, function to their full capacity, and realize their fundamental human rights. And so, what do we do about this? The Commissioner's report comes up with some fairly big, diverse, and upstream solutions for healthcare, for governments, and for society at large. But then it also goes into lots of specific smaller examples, which are available in the 46 pages. But essentially, they all fall under the following: value women, compensate women, count women, and be accountable to women. And I think while it's apparent that we still have a long way to go and lots of work to do to ensure women everywhere are valued, compensated, and accounted for, I think it's also important to look back at how far we've come. So this is from the Commission, and it's just highlighting the important milestones for women in health over time from 1911. And I think from the invention of the PAP in 1943 and the start of contraceptive research to the existence of this Commission, it definitely feels like we are still moving and heading in the right direction. And so with a future focus on the topic, I just wanted to highlight a new commission that has been brought together recently. The Lancet Commission on Gender and Global Health was formed last year and will hopefully continue and expand on this advocacy work. And it's definitely something worth looking out for. And I just wanted to end with a quote from the editorial, which says, "The change needed to reach a goal of gender equality and health equity is substantial, structural, and system-wide, and the voices demanding this change have never been louder." And thank you to all of you for listening today, but also thank you to these faces and the many others who very much are these voices demanding change. Next. Prof. Honikman, over to you. I'll just stop sharing my screen quickly. There you go.
Hello, everybody. It's a real honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Salome, and thanks for the introduction, Sipho, and for your wonderful orientation to women's health, Amy. That was great. I want to start off saying two things. I'm not a psychiatrist, Salome. I'm just an ordinary doctor. I'm not a specialist. And I work, as you know, in maternal mental health based at the Perinatal Mental Health Project here at UCT in the Center for Public Mental Health. I'm also a very bad timekeeper, so if somebody could give me a nudge at about 25 minutes in, I know that I need to hurry up because I really look forward to some interesting questions and some discussion. So please do let me know about the time. I'm going to be sharing my presentation right now, and at some point, hopefully, sharing some film footage as well. So give me a minute to get into the presentation, and let's see. Great. Can everybody see the full screen? Can I just have confirmation that it's there as a full screen slide?
We can't see the full screen yet.
Okay, let me just do one other thing. Okay. How's that? You can see the screen now?
Yes, we can.
Fabulous. I am speaking today about obstetric violence, and for many in the audience, this terminology may jar. It is a controversial language which I've intentionally chosen to use because there is a global movement now to use this term over more neutral labels such as mistreatment or disrespect as part of a deliberate move to confront the problematic practices which have often been hidden or unacknowledged. So we are preferring now to use a language that is powerfully including the notion of condemnation of such actions. Previously, the idea of obstetric violence was linked to issues of quality of care, it was linked to failure of evidence of best practice, but we are now learning that the problem of obstetric violence is broader than that. It's much more contextually located, and in South Africa in particular, the enormous extent of the problem we're facing here we think is linked to, among other things, the entrenched systems of gender-based violence, gender-based and class-based inequalities and abuses in our country. So in this talk, I'd like to cover what is obstetric violence globally and South Africa and through the lens of South Africa, and look at some of the interventions that have come forward. How do we understand how to remedy this systemic problem? And in particular, I'd like to present to you the secret history method, which we developed at the Perinatal Mental Health Project. So from an epidemiological point of view, we know that the problem of obstetric violence is ubiquitous. It is not limited to low income settings or high income settings. It appears to occur at very high rates across a range of different settings. However, the quantitative evidence on the burden is limited because of measurement issues, and I'll speak a little bit about that later. there aren't standardized ways in which people are classifying obstetric violence, and therefore in the studies that are trying to quantify the problem, we have a heterogeneous approach to data collection and quantifying prevalence. However, Megan Boren, who's one of the leads in researching obstetric violence globally, conducted a careful study in 2019 in 4 countries, which used a systematic approach, a very careful approach to assessing prevalence in these 4 countries. It was actually published in the Lancet. It was based on both labour observations, direct observations of labour, as well as community-based surveys. And of 900 women who were assessed, it appears that about a third of these women are experiencing a verbal and non-verbal forms of obstetric violence, so physical forms as well. Boren has suggested a standardized approach to thinking about the different types of obstetric violence, and it's a very coherent approach which she suggests be used in further research so that we can move forward to understanding the extent of the problem. We are aware of some of these types, but it's useful to have a sort of schema of and map out the different types of violence that occur across the board. Many of us will know about physical abuse that occurs in childbirth, sexual abuse, verbal abuse. Stigma and discrimination is also a typology that has been described based on sociodemographic characteristics or on medical conditions, for example, HIV, which has been shown to confer particular risk for women to experience obstetric violence in South Africa and Malawi, for instance. Failure to meet professional standards of care, and poor rapport between women and providers, which encompasses a range of different constructs. Then particularly health systems conditions and constraints are relevant with respect to lack of resources, infrastructural resources, which can confer a form of violence for women, lack of supportive policies, and an institutional culture that enables violence against women. What are the outcomes of obstetric violence? It has been shown that as a consequence of experiencing obstetric violence or of hearing about others experiencing obstetric violence, women may fail to take up maternity services and use antenatal care and institutional delivery far less. There are a range of trauma responses that have been demonstrated in women who've experienced obstetric violence. And in terms of infant outcomes, there appear to be primary and secondary infant outcomes. And by that, I mean there is an increased risk to physical health adverse physical health outcomes for infants as a result of obstetric violence. But there is also a range of consequences for the infant and the child secondary to the distress experienced by the mother. And I'll speak a little bit more about that with respect to this notion of traumatic birth. May I just request that those who haven't muted themselves could just put their microphones on mute? I'm getting a little bit of audio feedback. Thanks. So Cheryl Titano Beck is one of the lead writers on the concept of traumatic birth, and she's clear in saying that certain occurrences during childbirth may confer trauma for some people, but not necessarily for all, and a lot of that depends on the context in which difficult childbirth experiences are happening, where obstetric procedures, where emergency situations unfold, and the care provider, the health providers are supportive. there may be much less trauma involved than when there are when this care is not available. So when there is a lack of communication, in particular, around these sorts of these difficulties in childbirth or complications, then it is far more likely that the woman will experience some form of trauma. And if there's a lack of acknowledgement of the challenge of the experience, that can also lead to trauma. And so some women can end up, after experiencing complications in childbirth, feeling stripped of protective layers, stripped of their dignity, feeling like another piece of meat, and have their quotes of feeling having been raped on the delivery table. So the consequences of a traumatic birth have ripple effects in terms of post-traumatic stress symptoms. And in a systematic review of mixed method studies, Cheryl Titano-Beck showed quite a wide range, you can see there, of post-traumatic symptoms. But interestingly, a study hot off the press from Spain, which is a country with one of the highest documented prevalences of obstetric violence, it seems to be about 67%, showed that in terms of verbal obstetric violence and post-traumatic stress, there's a 5-fold increased risk of post-traumatic stress in women who've experienced verbal obstetric violence, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Other forms of psychological violence increases the risk of post-traumatic stress disorder to about 2.5-fold. Yildiz showed that PTSD, so from a diagnostic basis, it can be 4 to 19% post-birth trauma. We know that there are breastfeeding difficulties often associated with a traumatic birth, and that there are problems with interaction and attachment with the infant. Subsequent pregnancies and subsequent childbirth experiences can be severely impacted emotionally, psychologically, as well as physically from a previous traumatic birth experience. And there are ripple effects on the partner and the family as well. Just to continue with this idea of trauma, some of these symptoms might be experienced as intrusive thoughts by the women of the birth experience, a feeling of disconnection with others, including the baby, because of these intrusive thoughts. There's often avoidance, which translates to isolation, and this can affect infant attachment, as I've mentioned before, and can prevent mothers from having successful, happy experiences going forward as parents or as pregnant women. There's a numbness, could be a numbness, detachment, anger. There may be problems with anniversaries of the event, of the traumatic event, with triggering physical and psychological symptoms, and as I mentioned, problems with breastfeeding, which can invoke flashbacks, physical pain, a feeling of violation. So and as I mentioned as well, subsequent childbirth problems may be linked to anxiety during the pregnancy. So we know that antenatal anxiety is strongly associated with childbirth difficulties, and over-strategizing around the childbirth itself, a seeking for empowerment, and we know that subsequent childbirths have the opportunity, on the one hand, to be re-traumatizing, but interestingly, if well managed, with compassion and a psychotherapeutic approach, subsequent childbirths can actually heal previous traumatic experiences. I need to move on in the interest of time. In South Africa, the famous reports come from Rachel Jukes as far back as 1990, where she used an anthropological lens to understand the widespread problem in our country of obstetric violence. She speaks about the inferiority that that patients embody or feel within a hierarchical health system. She speaks about how health workers assert a middle-class identity, creating a social distance between themselves and the patients and the women, and that their fantasies of power, that a lot of the behaviors, the violent behaviors, are reactive and ritualized. And there is mention in her reports, which are fascinating to read, about how the legacy of apartheid has left many midwives in a position of embodying the kind of abuses and human rights violations that apartheid inflicted on Black women over so many years. Lou-Marie Kruger in 2010 writes interestingly from a psychoanalytic point of view about how obstetric violence is in our settings is often ritualized, sanctioned and normalized, and it becomes part of the institutional culture. The Human Rights Watch wrote a scathing report in 2011 after some deaths of babies and women themselves in the Eastern Cape, which calls for a response to the lack of accountability for these situations. There seem to be particularly vulnerable subgroups in South Africa in terms of higher risk for experiencing obstetric violence, and no surprise these are migrants and refugees, adolescents, women with physical and mental disabilities, and those who are less educated. So I've spoken already about some of the potential causes in our setting. We know with the abuse, with historic abuses of power, and many of those we have a continued legacy, and we have embodied those within systems of hierarchy and power, such as the military or health systems, and this often provides a stage on which to replay those traumas and to perpetuate those traumas against others. We have structural causes in our setting, and our health systems are struggling with high patient volumes, poor infrastructures, low levels of supervision, and lack of accountability. We know that many of our health workers over-identify sometimes with the women themselves, and there's a sense of if I'm kind and connect with the women, this is too close for comfort. This is going to evoke for me my own distress, and so there's an othering or a distancing that happens. We also have high levels of obstetric or perinatal pathology, which cause a heightened sense of anxiety in childbirthing situations, and women are often unaccompanied. We know there are high levels of compassion, fatigue, and burnout among staff for a variety of reasons, and this is particularly experienced now in the COVID crisis, as we know. Briefly to mention, in the Western Cape, we were responsible, among many other important players, to develop something called Patient-Centered Maternity Care Code several years ago, which centers on 5 core principles. Unfortunately, the implementation of the code has not been supported with enough of the other structural components to ensuring obstetric care, but the code exists and has been ratified. This is supported by the Western Cape's core values of caring work, which is a quality improvement initiative, and the idea of patient-centered care, which is espoused by the Western Cape explicitly. Whether this is implemented and supported through other fundamental strategies is up for debate. But the idea is that we're wanting to create an enabling environment so that in which clinical care provision can take place, and where empathic communication and companionship can support a compassionate and respectful response and prevent obstetric violence from happening. Globally, there have been several really interesting advocacy responses. You may have heard of the White Ribbon Alliance, which is a global organization for safe motherhood, who issued a charter several years ago, which was updated in 2018, which is an excellent human rights framework calling for respect for maternity care. The World Health Organization has issued 4 different guidelines which include explicit reference to obstetric violence and respect for maternity care. And the statement was issued by the WHO in this regard in 2014. The United Nations Human Rights Council recently issued a statement which placed obstetric violence in the gender-based violence through the gender-based violence frame, which is a very useful frame to understand the problem and potentially address the problem. So if we are wanting to look at interventions, we need to understand that we need multiple interventions at a micro, meso, and at macro levels. We are needing continuous support during childbirth. Megan Boren did a Cochrane review of this, was interested in looking at whether childbirth impacted a range of obstetric and neonatal outcomes, and also potentially whether continued support could mitigate against obstetric violence. And I strongly recommend you looking at that Cochrane review. We need to look at training of service providers on ethics of care, professionalism, and empathic care, and include in this training competency assessments, monitoring, and supportive supervision. It's not just enough to train people and let them and assume and hope that they're going to embody the didactic training that we give. It has to be supplemented with these other components. There needs to be explicit stances by different leadership entities against obstetric violence, and by this I mean professional associations, institutional boards, and perhaps this is something that global surgery can lead and making an explicit stance against this human rights violation. We need to work better at measuring and reporting the problem. And Jolivet et al. Have spoken about several measurement difficulties. She's spoken about there being a huge variation in how sites or individuals are selected, how we define obstetric violence, and how we measure it, introducing many different types of biases in the research work that's being conducted. So we really need to look very carefully about measurement issues. We need to address the structural impediments, such as infrastructural problems, staffing numbers, staff wellness and support. We need to look at the problem from a legal point of view. Latin America has led the way here, following Spain and Venezuela and Brazil. And in South Africa, there seems to be a potential criminal law response that we can look at as well. And we need to look at structural approaches to gender-based violence. So we need a multi-component approach, and I'd like to highlight this fabulous project that was conducted in Kenya, which used such 3 or 4 different approaches at different levels and showed positive effects in terms of outcomes and reducing prevalence. So what's the Perinatal Mental Health Project Secret History Method? Well, our project we aim to integrate mental health care into maternity care as a routine part of maternity care throughout the country. But we realized quite early on, after we started in 2002, that the environment in which we were wanting to integrate mental health care wasn't well. And this issue of obstetric violence was so pervasive that we wouldn't we would not succeed in integrating mental health care if we didn't as an initial step try to address what was going on in terms of disrespectful care or obstetric violence. We wanted to explore what was possible in terms of mental health care for mothers using existing staff, and we felt that we needed to take an approach to heal the environment and to work with staff before we try to integrate mental health care. Sorry for this. We wanted to shift away from ordinary engagements, which were often disrespectful, to becoming potentially therapeutic, and if not, empathic. And this is written up in a paper that was published a couple of years ago in Transcultural Psychiatry. So at this point, I'd like to just demonstrate to you very briefly this interactive approach that we used that we use in the secret history method. And I'm going to just switch screen. So if you'll bear with me for a minute while I just bring in the film for a second.
So I would like half of the group to become Tembisa. Tembisa, you are a 15-year-old in your first pregnancy. 15. The shifts of the nursing staff are from 7 to 7, and you are arriving at 6:30. There is blood in your panties, and we're starting to get these strange pains that we've never had before. What are we feeling and what do we need? I'm afraid of how I'm going to be treated because I'm in my school uniform. Yes, you are. You're in your school uniform? Yes. You've come into the clinic in your school uniform. So what are you scared about? The staff that's going to be rude to me and they're going to judge me because I'm a teenager and I'm pregnant. Are you a bit ashamed of that? I'm very ashamed. The nurses are rude. I don't know what to expect. How am I going to deliver this child? How am I going to do this? I would like half of the group to become health worker mobile. We are on labour ward duty and we're due to leave in half an hour. We know our mother-in-law is arriving for dinner tonight and our supervisor this whole week has been in meetings. How are we feeling and what do we need? Working the whole day. I'm so tired and frustrated. Frustrated? Now there's nobody here with me. I'm all on my own. And now this admission comes and it's going to take time and it's almost 7 o'clock. I'm angry because I don't want to work at this time. Can you feel how angry she is? Yes. Look at this young girl. She's coming in like this. What are we feeling? What are we going to say to her? Don't you look at the time? Don't you know that we're finishing at 7? You're working till 7. You work till 7. It's only off for 6 now. You've got the time. Just go sit in the corner, please. You need to wait for the night stop. This is... My back is sore and there's blood everywhere. Sister, can you help me, please? I'm alone here. I'm so tired of this. I am tired of having to be a mother to teenagers that is so irresponsible. Sister, I know that it's almost our time. Vulnerable when you are playing this part. And worthless also. I mean, firstly getting into the situation, but also having to go through it alone and also having this healthcare worker just ignore me and just push me aside. I felt quite humiliated from the responses that I got from the healthcare worker. I'm coming to her for help, but she's not actually giving me the help that I need. As the health worker, what did you notice? What really stood out for me was this huge position of power that us as healthcare workers have over our patients. And that power can either be used to build your patient, to empower your patient, or to humiliate the patient. We look at each other for being late. We look at each other for not doing this. I'm doing too much. And that is all adding to our aggressiveness. The baggage gets heavier and heavier. We need to really work as a group. We mustn't come to the hospital with our problems. Did you also notice in this interaction how the cycle of violence seemed to increase? The more the one shouted, the other one raised its voice as well. So they're both feeling in this engagement. Bakelwa, you are a 24-year-old woman in your second pregnancy. You have been in active labor for many hours now, 6 hours. And between your last pregnancy and this one, your boyfriend raped you after you broke up with him. Health worker Pumza, you have had such a busy shift on labor ward. And this week, because you've got lots of financial problems at home, you've had to work extra shifts to get that bit of extra money. And your back is incredibly sore. So we'll start from when you greet each other and get to know each other. Hello, Bakelwa. I'm Pumza, and I'll be the midwife that's assisting you today. Thank you for coming to our facility. I want to assure you that everything that you say here will be kept confidential. Okay? I can see that you're in a lot of pain.
Yes, sister, it's for 6 hours now.
Gosh, you must be so tired.
Yes, I'm very tired. I need help.
Okay, and I'm going to help you, okay? I'm just going to quickly draw the curtain.
Please
and
make
I'm going
it
to have
quick.
a look at what's going on, okay?
You keep on saying you're going to help me. Please, mommy. I'm tired of this now.
Okay, I'm going to help you.
How long has it been now? 6 hours.
6 hours, yeah. They promised to help
While
me.
the pain is there, is it okay if I rub your back?
Yes,
And
please.
then we can have a chat once the contraction is over. Let me know when it's over, right?
Please help me.
Okay. How would you feel about moving about in the labor ward, trying getting up out of the bed?
But I'm very tired. I
We know
don't
that
have energy.
It does help to bring the baby down, to move, and to make the labor shorter.
But I will try, but I don't have energy. It's been a long time now.
It does help to shorten the labor.
I will try, but not now because
I see you're quite tired, eh?
yeah, I'm very
It's been a
tired.
long 6 hours for you.
Okay, my dear, please, man, I understand it has been a painful experience for you, and I understand that you are scared and afraid. I'm here to help you. Let's work together, my dear. Breathe when there's a pain. Breathe. I'm here with you. We're gonna give birth now.
I can't take it anymore, sister. Now.
Breathe in and out while the pain is there. Take a deep breath. In and out. In and out.
Okay, let's just stop sharing, and I'm going to go back to the presentation as quickly as I can.
Hi, Prof. I just want to flag the time.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Sipo, say that again.
I just wanted to flag the time. We're at 13:49. So
Thank you very much. I will move as fast as I can and share this. I'm just sharing. Why can't I share? There we go. So that gives you a sense of the secret history. And I can speak more about it if there is an interest. We kind of had a sense that through the safety and through the impact of a game, and in fact in real life settings when we do the secret history, there's usually a lot of laughter. There's usually a lot more humor that you can see than you can see in the film, and there's a sense of catharsis that happens as a result of playing out the disrespectful or the abusive situation, and then for having the opportunity to play out a respectful alternative and a compassionate alternative. And in between the two scenarios, there is a discussion about what the skills might be for practicing empathic care. The method is based on theatre of the oppressed, which is a politically driven method of creating theatre that was developed by Brazilian philosophers and activists and political thinkers, Augusto Boal and Paulo Freire, where theatre is used to promote social and political change and break down barriers and promote knowledge. I'm going to move on to the next slide due to time. I just want to mention that we have evaluated the method. We have evaluated the method in a couple of different ways, not in a very not using very sophisticated methodology, but sort of in-depth interviews where we came across some interesting feedback from participants in the method who participated in the training. It makes us realize what is going on in our patients is the same as what we are going through. Our feelings and needs are the same. We can decide whether to bring our personal problems to work or not. And then a reflection on the self. I was a teen mother. If I had nurses who were kind, it would have made such a difference. Our second evaluation was with an external researcher using a thematic analysis. 4 themes were identified, whereby the perspective of the other was changed, the benefits of new communication tools that were given in the training. There was discussion about the various challenges of adopting new skills. There seems to be a critical mass of people who need to be trained in order for an entire unit or system to adopt skills systematically. And that improving the mental health of nursing staff will improve the care given to patients. So we analyzed the situation as that if we identify with the other, if we allow a play or a game to allow us to identify with the other, this enables a dissolution or a reframing of unhelpful thoughts. And that there is a process of reintegration of self versus other. It allows participants to engage with a wider context of maternal care, one which encourages empathy and validates sympathy for the self. And that these are mutually reinforcing processes, and that we need to address the mental health care needs of providers, and we cannot separate that from the mental health care needs of mothers. We have adapted and used the secret history method in various other settings, different provider settings. It was even used by a friend of mine who works with sex worker advocacy, where she used it with police officers. And in Freiburg, Germany, we adapted it for there, and it was very interesting to learn about the differences in that setting, and we've written that up in a couple of papers. We're grateful that the method has been taken up into the ESMO training package, the ESMO module on respectful maternity care. We have a film available on our website, which is used to supplement the secret history method training. It looks at 6 core empathic engagement skills, and we've also produced a book on maternal mental health, which integrates elements of obstetric violence and respectful care. And I'd like to end off here and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. I'd love you to email us. Let's see if we can have a bit of discussion before we have to finish today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. Honikman. And thank you, Dr. Paterson. I think this was an awesome and amazing meeting. I think Dr. Paterson really challenged our use of language in speaking about women's health versus women and health, and reminded us that women's health and women and health is a key strategy for sustainable societal development. And then Prof. Honikman has really unpacked obstetric violence in terms of its prevalence, the outcomes, and our understanding of traumatic birth, as well as focusing particularly on South Africa. So it was also really amazing to hear about the secret history. So we have some questions in the chat, but I see Dr. Adams has a question. So Dr. Adams, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Simone. Thank you. That was so brilliant. And it's so lovely to see the Mowbray staff in those videos and identifying them, playing those roles so well. I think it was completely excellent. And I think we all maybe felt quite emotional about certain parts of that video. I think I just wanted to add a comment. When you, in your presentation, spoke about empathy and post-traumatic stress disorder, often just for the younger doctors, I often been doing around year, and even in my own experience in private when I had my children, there's a tendency for doctors to talk about patients, about them, in front of them, okay? For example, I think we need to move away from that. I will maybe be doing around and then you hear the registrar telling you about this is an unbooked patient, she just walked in now, that sort of thing, when we don't explore the reason why she's unbooked. If you take the time to explore, you'll find out possibly that she had a previous season where she lost a baby and was shouted at, that sort of thing. Similarly, when I had my kids, I remember going into a private facility and one of the nursing sisters mentioning to the other one in front of me, she doesn't even have DVT stockings and she's a doctor. You know, you tend to forget that the patient is there, and those things are so important because you remember those things. As I'm mentioning it to you, I will not forget that tone that was spoken about. So I think being empathetic is realizing that when someone's in front of you, you speak to them in a manner that you would want to be spoken to. And thank you for that, Simone. I'm going to apologize because I have to leave for another meeting at 2. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, fabulous comment. I think the other to look at it on the other side is that when those engagements are kind and containing and caring, those are also remembered. Those are also remembered 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So there is the other side to that coin. And I think you're right. It's sometimes those very subtle comments that just act to undermine the power or to undermine the agency or the dignity of the woman that are so deeply felt at the time. Yeah, thank you for your comment. I have a question here that I'd like to respond to in the chat from Regan Bowden. How has the response from various stakeholders been? How do you advise us to better engage with policymakers to affect change? Have you been dismayed or encouraged by the responses you received over the years? So we have been very, very encouraged by how South African health workers who go through the secret history method seem to really take it up. They seem to be very open to self-reflection. They seem I'm not sure if it's a South African culture, but there is an openness to notice where things are not going well, and to laugh, to use humor, to self-reflect, and to shift quite quickly and quite lightly. I think South Africans are quite light on their feet with respect to shifting behavioral patterns when the opportunity is given to them. So we've been very heartened, even when this training has been provided by others. So we've heard through the ISMO training where others who are not as familiar with the method as we are conducting the training and then go back into those facilities. The responses that are happening from the frontline workers have been amazing. With respect to policymakers, we are less positive about it because we need, as I mentioned, these multiple layers of interventions. The secret history is not enough. We need to be looking at legal frameworks. We needing to be looking at accountability frameworks. We need to be looking at shifting institutional culture in training. So I think we've still got a long way to go, which is a long-winded response to that chat. Are there any other questions?
I think this is truly the beginning of a dialogue, because I feel like we really haven't unpacked obstetric violence, as you said, and particularly with these definitions. So I think this is definitely the beginning of the conversation. It's just unfortunate that we do have to close in the interest of time. But thank you again to Dr. Paterson and to Prof. Honikman. I think the talk is usually available via recording, and the speaker's contact details will be available. So this is a dialogue that we should continue. But with that being said, I'm going to hand over to Prof to close.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both of you. Nothing to add. I mean, these are very compelling, sobering talks, and thank you so much. And I think one of the points that you started with about calling it obstetric violence, I've often, referred to, with gender-based violence, for example, we don't call it gender-based disrespect. It's violence, and calling it out, calling it what it is, reminds us that this is unacceptable and it isn't right. So thank you to both of you, and to everyone, and thank you for attending, staying on, and enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll continue next month with other talks, but thank you so much for today.
Thank
you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. There's somebody in the labor ward. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks so much, Simone. Can I quickly ask, as we're ending, the ESMO training, so is that it's in all ESMO training now? So if we wanted to bring it into a hospital, for example, here, could we do that?
You just ask for the module.
That'd be
It's one of the modules. It's one of the modules. Yeah. I mean, if you're wanting to conduct the training, then you and I can sort of have a quick session online. I can walk you through it, send you the facilitator's notes, the proceed, all the stuff, if you like.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll be in touch with you. I'll speak to our department here and see what we can do.
Cool. Otherwise, I'd be curious to know whether you can access it through ESMO and through the master trainer process, because that's actually the system we want to operate.
Yeah.
We want it to be functioning independently of us so that people can access it. So that would be interesting to know.
Maybe check that out and see if I have success.
Yeah. That would be great. I overspoke. I should have had more time for conversation.
No, I think the video is nice, and that it explains a lot for you. I was wondering how you're going to explain the whole thing from reading the paper, and the video kind of does a lot of the explaining for you, so it's actually perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It allows me to breathe. I must also chat. I found a mutual friend who's very impressed with you. Mark Patrick says you're a fantastic doctor.
Yeah, he's been wonderful. He's been a huge support system here with all of my babies. I message him often, not knowing what's going on with cardiac conditions and that kind of thing. And he's really been wonderful.
He's a very close friend, and he's very impressed with you as a clinician.
That's nice to know. Thank you. Yeah, I did 2 weeks at Gray's, and he taught me a lot.
He said there was sort of what's it, instead of in-reach instead of outreach.
I'm not sure. Do we need to get off this chat? Is there?
Maybe. I see there's a couple of others. Hi, Chor. I see my mom's still on listening to us.
Hi, Emily. How is Oxford?
Hi, Chor. I'm guessing that we're allowed to stay on here because I was
just listening in. A nice presentation and Amy as well.
Thank you. Where are you working? What's your field?
I'm a gynecologist, and I trained as a clinical embryologist in Oxford. And right now I'm on a PhD program at UCT, looking at fertility preservation for women planned for cancer treatment.
Okay.
Based in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam.
Okay, he's from Tanzania. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the extent of the problem in Tanzania? Obstetric violence in Tanzania? What are your experiences there?
Yes, it's quite an issue. But what is remarkable is what has not been done, the aspect acknowledging it and the need for training at policy level. So I think that would be a great step to addressing the issue. So it has to be institutional in acknowledging and also trying to address it moving forward.
It's interesting. I think that acknowledging thing is very important. When I did the work in Germany, I was speaking to a mixed group of people who were midwives, nurses, because they're completely different professions there, doctors and psychologists, psychoanalysts. And when we spoke about the problem, they completely denied, there were half of them who denied it existed. So in fact, it was the older generation and the men who said, no, we don't have this problem in Germany. We would never have, this terrible situation is never something that would happen in Germany. Whereas the nurses and the midwives were saying, but it does happen here. It happens especially with refugees, the refugee population, the non-German population in Germany. And it happens. It's happening on our labor wards. We are seeing it. And the kind of the white senior men were saying, no, but it doesn't. And it was like this weird kind of denialism among the different cadres of worker, because I think it's quite shameful to acknowledge it. So I think you're right. I think the first step is acknowledgement.
Yeah, sure. Especially in tertiary hospitals where you have trainees, if that is enshrined in the curriculum, and then it would be quite useful to begin to supervise a transition. Said, okay, this is how it used to be, and now we want to start this journey together and change perceptions, attitudes, and practices eventually. But I think the key thing, it has to happen at policy level. And once there is such an acknowledgement, then now there can be policy statements and then now the actual practice. But labor ward experience is quite, I think in private sector, there is a bit of sensitivity about lawsuit. Not much so in the public sector. So that could be two comparable groups, talking to women who just delivered in the most recent times and comparing their experiences and where they had the deliveries is something that can maybe come up with some findings. Is the care better in private sector or is it better in public sector? And what could explain the differences? Is it better in the public sector because they are trainees? We don't know. Or is it worse off in the public sector because they are trainees and are still acquiring the right professional attitudes? We don't know, probably. Would be interesting.
Great research projects. I mean, if you're ever leading a master student or a PhD student, you could supervise them to do that. Excellent research projects, yeah. Thanks.
Prof. Honikman, sorry.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say it's quite interesting here, or at least what I found, comparing kind of the prevalence of obstetric violence. Oh, sorry, Cho. I don't know if we can hear you properly.
I wonder if he dropped off. Oh, okay. All right.
I was saying, I was saying I am happy. I should say the terminology is, I think, appropriate. Calling it obstetrical violence because of the settings and the kind of experiences that might not be so pleasant to women going through that. So yes, it is what it has been called, and I think it's a good start to say so.
I didn't hear that so well. Did you, Amy?
I think he's saying, Cho's saying that he feels as though the name obstetric violence is appropriate, and he's glad that we're calling it that. Yeah.
I was actually wanting to do a little survey among the people who are coming onto the meeting to find out how many people found the terminology offensive. Because I've spoken with people before who said, you can't call it that, you should, and
that's
isn't it? Yeah, and it's interesting, and I think there is an argument for being a little bit more gentle with the terminology in terms of persuading people in power to do stuff about it. That, so there's the argument on that side, but then there's the argument about let's call it what it is, so that we can condemn it through our language. Yeah, so that there is a bit of a sort of, it's a tricky to navigate the two options there. What were you saying, Amy?
I was going to say, I found it quite interesting comparing, studying in Cape Town and being involved in clinical care in my last few years there, and then compared to Durban and then compared to a district hospital, kind of who experiences more obstetric violence and the prevalence. I found, I think, certain areas in Cape Town in particular where the women who are the nursing staff aren't the same profile as the women who are coming in labor. Typically, that is where I felt like it was the worst. So we obviously move around different spots, and I definitely felt like that was the worst obstetric violence I saw. And I remember saying to quite a few people that I felt I liked obstetrics a lot more than I thought I was going to when I moved to Durban, just because I felt like the midwives were kinder to the patients. And then the exceptions I saw in Durban that used to upset me was we had fewer refugees and foreigners, but we still had foreigners because it's a city. And when they would come in, suddenly you'd see this ugly side, for lack of a better word, of a lot of the midwives you adored come out, and they suddenly were like vicious to this woman who couldn't speak English when they'd been really nice to the previous woman. And so it was still there. And I think now it's interesting because in my community here, in my district hospital, our midwives are as much part of the community. They're the neighbors, and they're in the community that they're serving. And so it's actually the best. I mean, there's still issues, but it's the best that I've seen it in my experience so far, just because I think there isn't this divide of superiority a lot of the time and then again, there's still the exception of until the teenager comes in, and then that power play comes in again, and then it exists again. So it's just interesting to watch in the different places, and in a city tertiary care versus district care, how different it looks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is to do with institutional culture. And you might find that even within one maternity facility, one labor ward versus another labor ward will have a different culture, often driven by a different style of leadership or a different dynamic among teams. But I think the discrimination issue is huge. And I think when you're living in a society which either has a current or an historic legacy of discrimination, it gets played out. It's almost like the labor ward is a stage to play out what is subconsciously taken on. So these inequities manifest in this very kind of highly charged environment, whether it's kind of racism or xenophobia or classism. It's almost too easy to happen in a labor ward situation. But I need to run and fetch a child from school. So it was so lovely. It was fantastic to meet you.
Thank you, Prof. Nice to see you, Amy.
How long are you still around in Cape Town for? How long are you still around?
I haven't shown up in Cape Town yet. COVID came in. I'm trying to get done with my vaccinations, and then I can travel freely, hopefully.
Okay. Well, it would be nice to welcome you when you come. So give me an email when you arrive. Okay.
I look forward to that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for all of this and connecting, and all the best for your wonderful adventure in Oxford, the two of you Oxford people. And yeah, let's stay in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Prof. Thanks for everything. Bye, Chor. Nice to see you again.
Bye, Chor.
Okay, bye. Bye. Thank you.